Good evening, everyone. I have my cue. I'm Noreen Golfman. I'm Provost and Vice President Academic at Memorial, and I'm very pleased to be here tonight for what I know will be an engaging and thought-provoking discussion about post-oil dependent Newfoundland and Labrador. So on behalf of the entire Memorial community, I extend a warm welcome to you all. We have lots of competition tonight, as you know. And so we're very grateful that any of you came out here tonight to beat the fog and the drizzle and the rain and to hear our guest, of course, and stick around for interesting conversation after that. As you probably know, tonight's discussion is part of a special symposium taking place this week here at Memorial. Asking the big questions: what might a sustainable post-oil dependent Newfoundland and Labrador look like, and what kinds of skills, expertise, infrastructure, and institutions do we need to get there? And it's presented, of course, by Memorial and the Royal Society of Canada, the Atlantic Chapter specifically. So we are privileged to be joined via video conference by our special guest, Dr. Sigurgeirsdottir, I think I've got that right, who will share her perspective on the collapse of the Icelandic economy and the steps taken to rebuild and the lessons learned for Newfoundland and Labrador. And as you may know, there's a lot of drama happening in Iceland. We could probably have a whole other evening pumping our guests for information about the political happenings there, but these are unprecedented and significant events taking place within the political system of Iceland, and so therefore our guests could not be here tonight in St. John's as planned. So we are especially grateful for her participation from this distance. And you will learn a lot more about Dr. Sigurgeirsdottir and the work she has done shortly. But before we go further, we want to welcome, we have a special treat for everybody, Dr. Nancy Dunn and Professor Timothy Steve of Memorial School of Music to the stage. Anybody at Memorial probably knows these are world-renowned musicians and outstanding music educators, Nancy and Tim, and they perform professionally as the award-winning duo concertante. They were recently elected Fellows of the Royal Society of Canada. Woo-hoo! Well deserved. Dr. Dunn is an acclaimed violinist and Professor Steve is a renowned pianist. They perform nationally and internationally at recital and performance halls. They are the founders and co-artistic directors of the celebrated and wonderful Tuckamore Festival for talented young musicians. And that's a celebration, of course, of chamber music held each summer in the St. John's area, including right here on this campus. And just recently, I don't know how many people know, but both have been recognized, not surprisingly, with Memorial's President's Award for Outstanding Research and have just received the designation of University Research Professor. So bring it on. I told them there are no other prizes left, so please join me in welcoming Duo Concertante.
So we have two pieces for you this evening. The first is a very beautiful movement from Brahms's A Major Sonata, and then we'll follow that with Khachaturian's Saber Dance.
Tim, and we're so lucky to have them as our faculty members on staff, performers, needless to say. I'm now going to turn over the rest of the hosting duties tonight to my friend and colleague, Angela Antle. Most of you who listen to CBC Radio must know Angela, familiar voice, broadcasting with CBC for about 20 years. Angela is the writer of the award-winning documentary you saw last night, if you were there for it, Atlantic, that also played at the St. John's International Women's Film Festival almost 2 weeks ago now, and Angela is vice chair of that festival. She is not only a broadcaster, she's an independent producer, she's a painter. She studied at Memorial at University of Western Ontario and at Ontario College of Art and Design. So she is a brilliant multitasker. Proud to call her my friend. And over to you, Angela. Please join me in welcoming her tonight.
Thanks, Noreen. That was very sweet. Nicest introduction I've ever had, actually. Good evening, Scylla. If it's okay if I call you Scylla rather than butcher your name. Okay, so I will give you a little heads up on what Dr. Sigurgeirsdottir is going to be talking about tonight. She has a PhD in social policy from the London School of Economics and Political Science, an MSc degree in social policy and planning, a diploma in health economics from the University of Iceland, and a BA in social work from Oslo University. She's worked as the Director of Services for the Elderly in Reykjavik. She did a consultancy for the World Bank, a strategic policy advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Health in Iceland, and she was a member of the European-wide network of policy experts working on employment, social affairs, and equal opportunities, and much more. So that's just a little bio. And tonight she's going to be talking about the collapse in Iceland, the economic collapse, and the impact that's had on the government, and that's why she's in Reykjavik and not here, and on various other things. So just to give you an idea of that collapse, over the period from 1990 to 99, GDP growth in Iceland was 2.3%, healthy, 4.1% between 2000 and 2008, 7.5%, 2004 to 2005, and then in 2010 it fell to -4, and finally landed at -10. So Dr. Sigurgeirsdottir is going to explore the collapse and how it has intensified the battle between access to the country's natural resources and transparent, sustainable public policies. So I won't delay any longer. I give you Dr. Sigurgeirsdottir, and she has a slide presentation that we're going to be showing up here, and then after, take notes, because after I'm going to be going to the floor for questions. All right, thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, and hello here from Reykjavik. I hope you hear me properly. Are you fine there? Okay, I'm fine here, but a little bit cold down here. So anyway, I hope this will be all right. And I will start by putting on these overheads that I will use for my lecture tonight. And let's see. So, I know that you can see me. I don't see you now. You have the best of both things. But anyways, I'm going to talk about the situation that was here, or what happened here in the run-up to the crash, and what then crashed actually, and what happened afterwards. The title of my talk is, as you can see, After the Storm. And with this title, my story focuses on the role of finance in a national economy where monetary policy is in the driving seat, whereas fiscal policy then plays a minor or limited role. If I were focusing on the role of natural resources alone in the national economy in Iceland, the title of my talk would be After the Fish, I guess. And yes, we do have many such stories in Iceland after the fish stories, and some of them will actually feature in my talk. But the interesting thing and a very crucial one to understand is that when telling after the fish stories, somehow we go back to telling the stories of the role of finance. And you will soon understand why that is. Let me give you an example. In the 1960s in Iceland, we had a prosperous decade. The water around Iceland had lots and lots and lots of fish. It was herring, lots of herring, and people were dancing by the barrels as they filled one barrel after another for export. And then all of a sudden in 1968, booms, it just disappeared, gone. It just left us. And what happened then? Yes, crisis. And we had a huge recession, and many Icelanders emigrated to other Nordic countries or even all the way down to Australia. And when the social partners in the labor market negotiated a new deal, there was not much money to negotiate about. So what they did is that yes, of course, people got some money in the pockets, but they got sizable social package. And this social package which is now the Icelandic pension scheme. The Icelandic pension scheme is a fully funded occupational pension funds, several. And they have now reached, the assets of the funds have now reached 150% of the Iceland GDP. 150% of the GDP. So, yes, our pension funds are a big fish in a small pond. To what extent fiscal policy has a role in helping monetary policy to manage the finance and produce or deliver the favorable results, or at least counteracting the negative effect of free capital flows, is a matter of choice, policy choice. No, you should not take me wrong here. It's not that I'm against finance. I'm not all against finance. It's just the financialization of everything. It's the speculative nature of short-term financial investment, which easily turns economic policy into a storm. And that is actually what happened here in 2008. When we look at economic policies in Iceland, by paying special attention to the role of finance, we can better understand the interaction between natural resources, human resources, and the outcome of national public policies. That was at least the view or experience of Professor Robert Aliber, who visited Iceland several times before and after the collapse in 2008. He told us once that one of his friends back in Chicago has said to him, "Look, Bob, Darwin went to tiny Galapagos to understand the evolution of the species and develop the theory of the evolution of species, although he could find everything he found there in England. And you go to tiny Iceland to understand financial crisis." And this exactly was the experience of Professor Robert Aliber. Iceland was so small that it was easier to learn in a matter of short time the whole of the bubble, the whole of the business cycle, how it boomed, how it burst, and how it came into recovery again. So it was a kind of a laboratory for economists. But what I'm going to cover here in my lecture is I'm going to give you a short statistical profile so as to set the scene for your understanding of the situation. I'm going to tell you very shortly about the institutional development here. That really matters, and you will understand why when you see that. And then I give you a few slides where you can see the gathering storm and the storm as it hit. Then I'll move into what has happened after the collapse, which is quite an interesting story, and I'll guess you will be surprised. So anyway, let's begin the trip. This is a little bit of the profile. The population of Iceland is about 330,000, and we have 74 municipalities around the country. In the 1980s, they were over 200, but now they've been merging, so they are 74. The area of Iceland is 100,000 square kilometers, so we have quite a good space over here, 3.2 per square kilometer. But as you can see, lots of this area is inhabitable. It's wasteland, glaciers, lakes. And population is more or less located in, or sort of situated in the capital regions and the southwest. And as you can see, it has been growing rapidly over the last century. As you can see, the urbanization has been that more and more proportion of the population is gathered around the capital region and the southwest. Here you see the map of Iceland and all the municipalities. You see the biggest glacier in Europe, and it is here in the southwest where most of the population lives. And if you've been in Iceland and you've gone up to Akureyri, it's up there north. There we have also the next big urbanization area. Well, maybe not big in Canadian context, but it's about 25,000 people living in this area up north. Here are the parliamentary constituencies. They are 6, or are they 8? In one, two, three, 8, 6 parliamentary constituency. We just had an election last Saturday, so I should know. Anyway, the labor force participation is very high in Iceland, and one of the key features about the labor participation or participation in the labor market is that the rate of female participation in the labor market has always been very high. It is among the highest, or if not just the highest in Europe, I think. That's what you can see here. But what is a matter of worry now after the collapse is that the level of unemployment for the younger population between 16 and 24 remains high, and it might not be high in international standards, but generally unemployment in Iceland is low in international standards. So 8.7% is high unemployment in Icelandic history. Now I'm going to browse through the main economic sectors. Jobs, as they are sort of distributed between the various sectors: agriculture, forestry, and fishing, the lowest, takes the lowest population. Industry, 17.8, and services is the biggest sector. And we can see how the picture changes when we look at the export value. It's merely or mainly fish production, but as a proportion of the total, it has sort of gone down relative to manufacturing. But if you look at manufacturing, it is mainly aluminium and silicon. So agricultural product is very little for export. It's mainly for domestic use. And the fishing, the water, the Icelandic water has been sort of, Icelandic authorities have been extending the water from 1952 onwards up to 1978, from 3 miles up to 200 miles. And so we have this water and the midline between Greenland up there in the left corner, and then you see Faroe Islands and Scotland. Fishery management in Iceland. Yes, this is one story of After the Fish. This is an After the Fish story. In the 70s, a report came out again and again that we were overfishing. And in early 80s, this was amounting to crisis. So it was clear that we had too many vessels, too many boats were fishing in Icelandic water, the same fish, chasing the same fish. So government decided to put in place or implement a system, fishing quota system, in order to increase efficiency, use fewer boats to get the same amount of fish, and also to ensure sustainable fishing. What happened actually in this move, in this step, the first step, is that fishing quotas were handed over to individual owners of fishing boats according to their historical records, how much they had been fishing in a matter of few years back. So actually they got the quota for free, and that is a matter of huge controversy here in Iceland. And if you meet Icelanders, you start to talk about this with Icelanders, you will have a heated debate. There is extreme controversy about this. And this controversy increased when the next step in this After the Fish policy was implemented in the 1990-1991, when they introduced and implemented the individual transferable quotas. That enabled those who have got the quota to sell their quotas, rent them out, or borrow against them, borrow against collaterals in fish they had not fished, and just unfished quotas. So what actually happened about the fishing industry and the effect this all had on the regions in Iceland? Here we have the map again. And prior to this step, we had lots of small harbors and the small societies along the coastline fishing, fish outside, just offshore or in various places around the island. But when the first step came, now notice the green dots, it's the first step, the concentration of the quotas into the hands of people, still though distributed in the regions and along the coast, but still though kept them in the regions, it was a process that started. Concentrations out there in the region. What happened in the next step is when they got these individual transferable quotas, bigger industries bought up smaller industries. So actually it was the big barons, the big owners of quotas, who actually determined regional policies, because they could buy a quota from one region or from one town and move the whole thing to their own, to the main base, and left the town just with no quota and no boats and the fisheries factory standing empty. So this has been a development since early 1990s. Farming and agriculture, that is mainly sheep and cattle, and it's a production more for domestic use. Do pay attention to the livestock, to the population of sheep, which is huge in Iceland, and also has been a matter of controversy, which we come back to later. The energy sector, we have abundance or lots and lots of energy. We are very blessed with what is considered as renewable energy. It's the hydropower and geothermal power. And this has been increasing in the last years. Mainly was hydro energy, and then technology to make use of geothermal energy has been developing and is increasing. So not much energy, but mainly hydro energy and geothermal energy. And to point that out to you that all Icelandic households, about 99 or 98, 99% of Icelandic households are heated up by geothermal water. So we don't use either coal or oil to warm up our houses. And mainly it's geothermal. Yes, the question is what we do with all this energy, since we are not using it for our households or our smaller industries. We are producing this energy for energy-intensive industries, like and mostly aluminum smelting, which are in different parts of the country, Kowa, Alcan, and Century Aluminium. And by the way, these are international corporations. These are not owned by Icelandic authorities or Icelandic firms. These are international corporations or international corporations that are the main buyers of our energy. So energy needs to be transported to the extensive industries. So what we do is, as you can see, yes, we have all these poles and cables running, crisscrossing our landscape. And this is a major issue also for because it spoils the view, and it is a big controversy in terms of putting poles and cables across natural wilderness. Like we see here, this is in the northeast of Iceland. And this lava that we are watching is probably 20 years old, and it's a spectacular landscape. And we've just had a huge row because of a company wanting to build poles right across there with cables to transfer energy to a new big industry in the northeast. So big industry, energy production and transport is in conflict with natural wilderness as a natural resource. And that's also puts risk to tourism, because this is one of the things that we are selling to make Iceland attractive to tourists. So there are tensions and controversies within and between sectors. In agriculture, for years and years, we kept drying up wetlands. Now, we are in the beginning phase of starting programs to retrieve wetlands because of climate change. We have erosion of vegetation in the commons due to big sheep stock, and also very much debated here in Iceland, farming is heavily subsidized by government. In the fishing industry, in the beginning there was a tension and competition between farming and fishing over the labor force. We have a small population, and when the people started to move away from the farms and down to the seashore to work in fishing and fish factories and that part of the economy, farmers were not happy. And then came the transferable quotas I told you about, undermining both regional policies and eroding local economies. And what is following about the fishing industry, and hugely controversial, as I told you right before, it is the rent seeking. This is to say, it's a privatization of public resources in the hands of very few quota barons, as we call them. I told you previously that they got the quota for free, and it has been a huge controversy and huge public debate whether they shouldn't pay a rent, or at least higher share of that natural resources to the state, to the public. And then we have the energy sectors and the tension between big industries and smaller industries, and you will understand a little bit more about that later. And the intrusive effect on the natural wilderness and protected areas, and risk for tourist industry, as I told you. There is also this lack of transparency in pricing to the big industries. They get low energy prices and they have tax privileges which they have got from government, and is also causing a huge debate here. So a little bit and very short about the institutional development, very shortly. This is just to tell you how young the Icelandic administration is and how young politics is here in Iceland. We've just got the constitution from the Danish king, first Icelandic minister in 1904, and we declared independence in 1944. But main issues that I wanted to underline here is that the first structure to develop and form in Iceland was the organized interests that developed in the late 1900s and early 20th century, where the local farmer societies or local fishing societies had the power, or were formed through in the regions, and where the public interest and the interest of the fisheries were the same. And then gradually this was centralized in national confederations. Later came the development of political parties, and they took the same structure as organized interest. Last of all this came the public administration, or the bureaucracy. So it came after the politics and after the organized interest, and it is weak relative to political power and organized interest. It is weak, it has low capabilities in dealing with and negotiating with big industries. Natural resources and export-based economies, that is the characteristic of the Icelandic economy, and the diversification of the economy has been the government policy for decades. But there are problems which are maybe characteristic, maybe a little bit special for Icelandic economy. After several unsuccessful attempts in the 1970s and 1980s, the implementation of government-sponsored regional initiatives like fish, mink, and fox farming, public trust in industrial policy faded. And it was all because of political corruption, they say. We also can observe when we look at the development, economic development and economic policy through the years in Iceland, we can observe how two types of crowding out mechanisms operate and shape economic policy. First, it is the competition between economic sectors in a small population with a flexible labor force. And secondly, it's small independent currency and open export-import dependent market economy. Icelandic domestic market is very small, so we are very heavily depending on import and also depending on export. So to continue with this, flexible labor force and independent currency have their ups and downs. Good news and bad news. Good news is flexible labor force adapts more easily to rapid changes in the economy, for example, in the times of recession and crisis, as we've just experienced. Secondly, independent currency helps stabilizing in times of severe financial shocks. This is also something that experienced recently. The bad news is that crowding out effect in the labor force in one sector due to a boom in another. And we will see the booming of the banking sector in Iceland just sucked in all skilled and well-educated members of the labor force. So it was very difficult to get well-skilled, well-trained, experienced expert into the administration or into new firms. When the currency appreciates, export industries suffer. unless government support is provided, for instance, in the form of subsidies or tax rebate. So let's then go to the storm, and I now browse quickly through several slides. We are not dwelling on them, but you can see immediately what is happening when we look at this. We first begin to see how it was possible to observe mechanisms in the run-up to the storm. It was the gathering storm. We could identify feedback mechanisms driving the buildup of the collapse. First of all, we could observe something called positive feedback mechanism, which is a self-reinforcing mechanism, opposite to a negative feedback mechanism, which is a self-correcting, kind of like a control valve in a heating system. These are very well-known concepts in political science and more explicitly in policy studies. And it goes like that. In the absence of negative feedback mechanisms, absence of control or regulation, we get positive feedback mechanisms like bandwagon effects and herding. What we saw is that we had there an atmosphere where policies of light touch regulation were encouraged. This then led to something that is known in the financial system as cyclicality. This is an opposite to counter-cyclicality. In the absence of counter-cyclical instruments, we get the effect of pro-cyclicality, which results partly from the use of short-term performance measures in managers' compensation schemes, like big bonuses, which create an higher appetite for risk. So higher bonuses, more appetite for risk, and that increased leverage in the system. So the interplay of these are the mechanisms we could see in the system. So here we are. This is a chart showing the build-up of the into the crash and how you have signs of these mechanisms, how the interplay of these mechanisms, how negative feedback mechanisms were removed and positive feedbacks kept coming in to sort of cheerlead the building up of the bubble. Some people like to go back to the transferable quotas, or back to 1990s to explain this development. Some go to that when Iceland joined the European Economic Area in 1993. And then following from that, we had the privatization of the banks, state banks, beginning in 1998, completed in 2003. And you can see National Economic Institute was abolished in 2008, just with a decision overnight. And National Economic Institute had the role to signal into the society analysis and warning signs or information about what was happening in the system. But when that was removed, that was distributed into various institutions which became much weaker after it has been dismantled. And then you can see that we had coming in warnings from abroad, like from the Danske Bank with the Geyser economy report, Fitch rating changing its prospects from stable to negative. But in came experts from abroad telling us and giving a health certificate to the economy, saying that this is good and the banks are sound and institutions are strong. And that kept on. Like, as you can see, Iceland should be the model of the world, said Arthur Laffer, a famous American economist, in November 2007. And then just a year later, we had the collapse. So this is that story of the run-up to the collapse. At the end of this period, the Icelandic three biggest banks, the asset of the biggest banks had reached to become 10 times the GDP. And the household debt had been rising rapidly, as you can see on the black line. And you can see the blue area the privatization of the bank, where they rush into the mortgage market and offering 100% mortgages to buy houses, and trying to crowd out the red area, which is the public housing fund. And the yellow area that you see over there on top, these are the Icelandic pension funds lending directly to households to finance houses. So this is kind of the interplay of lending and lending institution and household debt. What actually was there to fuel the bubble was not just incoming capital from abroad because of introduction of institutions and policies to increase foreign direct investment. It was also this huge competition to lending out to households, and then we had at the same time as we had a financial bubble, we had feeding into housing bubble. Huge building cranes were all over Reykjavik area. And you could see immediately when you came here, wow, now we have a sign of bubble coming up. And if you see that chart, you don't have to go dig into it, just look at it. If you can imagine, if this was a patient in an emergency and and you would just rush out and call in a rescue team or get a doctor coming immediately. You can see this is the Icelandic krona against the Swiss franc, the euros, and Japanese yen. And you don't have to kind of read into every step. You just shout out something is happening. And this also is an indication of that. This is a credit default swap on the banks and on the Icelandic sovereign. Okay, it's enough for you to say something is really happening in the system. And yes, in came a rescue team, the International Monetary Fund. And the director of the European Department, Paul Thompson, a deputy director, he said immediately when I came to the country, and what he saw and experienced, he phrased it this way: this was a near-death experience. The sense of fear and shock was palpable. Few, if any, countries had ever experienced such a catastrophic economic crash. The scale of the uncertainty was staggering, and the three banks had assets worth more than 10,000% of GDP. 1,000% of GDP, sorry. So you see, this was a rescue team coming in immediately to stop bleeding of the economy. I'm not going to go into details of that story. You can read it in those articles published in the Journal of Economics and the Review of International Political Economy. You can see more the mechanisms and the interaction of politics and finance in these articles. So after the storm, now this is very exciting. This is really interesting. So what has been the development since the collapse in 2008? You must be very excited. I can tell you this is, wow, look at this. Gosh, we have just made absolutely extraordinary recovery. You see, we had there 2009 up to 12%, between 12 and 14% unemployment. This is very high in Icelandic standards. And then it's gradually going down. Of course, we have some seasonal fluctuations, but coming down. And yes, inflation coming down. It's a great news from Iceland. And wow, what's happening there? Sign of worry? Do you think so? The krona is trading now at its highest level against the euro since Iceland's 2008 crisis. Some warning signs there, but still, do you remember when people talked about now this time is different? I think I can hear some warning signs from banks now and from the travel agency that the krona is getting too strong, and it may affect tourist industry. It will begin by the tourists, they spend less, but they may keep on coming, but they will spend less in the shops and in the restaurants. So, but anyway, signs of worry because of a stronger krona. But you can still hear voices. No, this time is different. It's not like the 2008. So the question is, what explains Iceland's recovery? Do you think it's government policy? I'm sure, usually politicians want us to believe that. Government policy, of course. So, government responses to the crisis. The measures were taken to reduce unemployment. I could tell you about all of the program of IMF, but I have to just concentrate on the one element of the responses, and that's the labor market. And what government did, of course, we had the IMF program, and they sort of set the route of how to manage and how to steer out of this crash. But the government had programs to address unemployment. Labor market programs such as training and retraining. They offered grant agreements to stimulate growth and innovation in the regions. They took up refunding research and development costs for smaller firms and industries working on export-oriented production. So you can see a little bit of fiscal policy there. After all, at this point, we had the first left-wing government in Icelandic history since the Republic. So yes, they seem to be kind of, into fiscal policy. And also refunding VAT on filming industry. Stimulated filming industry, both domestic and foreign producers, has a side effect, a wonderful side effect. It has introduced and advertised Iceland abroad as an interesting travel destination. And we get all sorts of pop stars traveling around, having their videotapes and videos taken here, musical videos, and now we've got warnings. Iceland has been very, very popular in India. And can you imagine if all the hundreds of millions of Indians coming visiting Iceland? So, wow, great news. But policy has not been the main driver of recovery. And now you'll get excited. How can that be? Well, what really explains Iceland's recovery, and that makes it problematic to draw lessons from Iceland. Yes, of course, there were dramatic measures taken to stabilize the currency. Capital controls on outflows in November 2008. And that meant that the capital that hadn't been able to flee out of the currency before the capital controls were implemented, they were locked in. And they were not locked in coffins or drawers or bunkers. They were there in the economy, trying to get a return on investment. So yes, we still had some capital. Collapse of the currency, yes, that was good news for export, particularly export of marine products in years of good catch. And yes, we were blessed. We had very good catch of the fishing catch these years. And more so, we had a new kid on the block. The mackerel appeared in masses in Icelandic water. It's never been here before, but suddenly knocking on the Icelandic water, and here they were. And we had a fishing boom. And very good prices for fish. And then again, volcanic eruption in 2010. Eyjafjallajökull. Do you think you can say that? Eyjafjallajökull. Very easy. Can you remember where you were when this volcano oozed the ashes all over the continent, and most of hundreds and thousands of airports were closed on the northern hemisphere? And people sitting on airports, Iceland? Iceland? What's that for a thing? Where is that? So Iceland was on the map. So, and then the fifth issue is the low rate of the currency made Iceland a cheaper travel destination. Okay, there came the tourist boom. Favorable external forces like prices for fish were high and lower prices in the world market. this all has been helping to recover from the crash in 2008. Well, I have to say, of course, it's good, but maybe not too good, because sometimes we need something tough to learn a lesson. This is too easy for politicians because most of them are thinking themselves for the recovery. But when you look at what is happening, this is really the big elements of the recovery, less so the government policy. The good news, yes, what is the good news? Look at this. Passengers through Keflavik Airport, which is our international airport, you see what is happening? They are coming. Tourists are coming to Iceland in thousands and thousands, and yes, millions. This is something we have not been prepared for. Absolutely not. We are only 330,000. And most of us are working in other industries than tourist industries. We've got lots of other things to do. And very few of us are trained in this sector. So this is absolutely a new challenge. And you see the red pillar there. Red pillar is the year when Eyjafjallajökull sent the ash into the air. It's the year when the British said, we want cash, not ash. It is when they wanted us to pay iSave. And anyway, they got the ash. So after the crash, a window of opportunity for startups of new initiatives, small firms and industries opened immediately after the collapse of the currency and developed in the aftermath while the rate of the krona was still low enough to facilitate access to market for export, making them better competitive on international markets. And yes, as you can see, we've got lots of brilliant young people and firms getting bigger and developing. But the problem is that it looks that these firms, they have limited scope to grow bigger because they require experts and specialized experts to work technologies and softwares and design. And these kind of initiatives, they couldn't do anything in the run-up to the crash. That was because all the banks sucked in all the most better educated and trained people. At that time, people went into MBA and trained as lawyers, and that was it. Most people wanted to get them trained for the banks. That's where you got the high salary. These small firms, they were suffering the run-up to the crash. But then, after the crash, slowly, with the help of government policies and the low krona, started to build up. And as they came to the limit of their growth, also because they had to rely on experts coming from abroad to settle in Iceland and work there. That was difficult because we had capital controls on outflows, and people coming from abroad, working here, having to send their money abroad, that was problematic. So some of them eventually moved their headquarters and had their headquarters abroad and had some of the design here in Iceland. So this is the story of firms, new initiatives beginning to develop, but then came the tourist industry. And you can see the same thing happening again, this crowding out in the labor force of a huge demand for labor into the tourist industry. And the story in Iceland, in Reykjavik, goes like that. You have a newly graduated PhD from the university. And their parents say, okay, now you just get yourself a driving license for buses and get yourself a work and find an apartment or something to live, because we are going to put our or your room on Airbnb. This is the story. And the bad news? Yeah. New initiatives and smaller export-oriented firms in the post-crisis economy are confronted with old and familiar problems of the natural resource-based economy. Rapidly increasing unregulated tourist industry, with huge and unprecedented pressure on infrastructure, which has been suffering from underinvestments all the time since during the crash. Roads, transport system, police, healthcare, rescue teams. And it is a pressure on sensitive nature of the most popular places, which did not have a proper infrastructure to protect the soil, the grass around natural reserves, lava, hot springs, and waterfalls. I don't know if any of you have been in Iceland. Maybe you know this, maybe you've seen this. High demand for low-skilled labor, a similar crowding out effect being observed in the labor force as in the run-up to the financial collapse. So, do you see the cycle here? Got a cycle. That's what Robert Alibert could see. And we are now observing that. And an all year round tourism, you know, people come here in masses, in the dark. Do you know why? What is it that they would like to see here in the middle of the winter? Can you imagine that? We have only 4 hours of daylight. What is it that they want to see? Northern Lights. Northern Lights. We are selling the Northern Lights. Aurora Borealis. So that means appreciation of the krona. And usually at this time of year, when the krona was not in control, it depreciated because we had already sold most of our fish abroad at this time of year, and it was sort of kind of low pressure. But now the economists and the experts are watching the krona keeping on and on. For instance, 1 year ago, if you parked 100 euros here in Iceland, it would be 129 euros now. So it's a good park money here now. Anyway, so that is appreciation of the krona, and that is the warning sign that are coming out now from banks and financial institutions. Good news for households, of course, because cheaper import of goods and services, but it has this adverse effect on export, crowding out smaller export industries which do not have government support. So we have clear signs of a new boom. So coming back to fishing and finance, the role of finance. I took this picture from a newspaper now in the running up to the election on last weekend. One of the politicians wrote an article about this, pointing out what is happening here. And it's a striking picture. What we have here on the left side is the rent to the state that the fisheries pay to the state. The left-wing government that took office in 2009 and was voted out in 2013 had raised the rent on the fishing industries for access to Icelandic waters, for access to what is not pursued, it is public ownership of natural resources in Iceland. But the new government that came in 2013 started to lower the rent. And as you can see, the rent to the state goes down and down and down. And what you see on the right-hand side, you see the payments of dividends to owners of fishing companies. And I told you that this is a huge controversy in Iceland. And if you come in a party or wherever you meet Icelanders and they are talking about the fishery in Iceland, you will have this hectic, heated debate, and people easily lose control over this because this raises so much anger, and there is so much division in the population because of this. So what also can happen is huge dividends they are paying themselves. They even use this dividend to privatize public services, which is against the will of the Icelandic public, And they use it also as a contribution to political parties who support their industries. So it's all transparent here. Nothing is hidden, but this is what we have. And this is what causes a huge anger. And another now, very interesting picture. This is Icelandic ministers in the Panama documents. And it's not just that we had 3 of our 9 ministers with their name in the Panama documents and having transferred money from out of the Icelandic krona into offshore industry, offshore banking. It's not just that. What we see and what the papers revealed for the Icelandic public is the cycle of the money. We can see that the money, that the capital that was able to flee out before the collapse is now back home, because they know, of course, much more higher value, because they were outside the krona when the krona collapsed by 50 or up to 100%. So they had their money, their capital in foreign currency. Now the money is coming back home, also because they know the political circumstances. They know how to play not just economics and finance, they know how to play politics here. So this has raised a huge public anger and protest here in Iceland. And what Icelandic public has learned after the collapse in 2008 is that it is possible to be an active player in politics, and it is possible to put pressure on politicians to resign and leave office. And that's what happened in January in the Pots and Pan revolution, when they put a pressure and the government left office. And that is what happened when the Panama Papers were revealed, the end of the cycle when money was going home, and not just coming back home. It was our politicians who participated in that. And they had been elected in public office. And what this gathering, the biggest protest in Icelandic history, following that on that Monday, the Prime Minister resigned. So Icelandic general public, the general Icelanders have learned a big lesson. First of all, they became expert in economics in a matter of week or two in 2008. You can talk economics with almost everyone. They knew about all these cycles and all these various technical words. And also they understood and learned that, well, politicians, they have to be held to an account. So the question is now, do we have lessons here for other countries? Maybe not specific to what actually happened in Iceland, but if we take that to more general terms of economic policy and democracy, there might be lessons for other countries. I don't know. That is something that others will have to consider. First of all, we have learned that economic policies shape the society and the life, well-being and livelihood of people in society. And we have learned that economic policies are too important to leave it to the market to decide. And democracy itself is too important to leave it to the politicians alone to shape democratic practices and economic policies. Then again, there is no such thing as a cruise control or an autopilot to push after elections and leave the rest to politicians. Democratic accountability matters, and for democratic accountability to work, public participation in shaping society by understanding and following up policies is crucial. That is what we have learned, but it took one of the biggest economic crashes in world history for us to learn this. But I told you, remember, I told you, institutions in Iceland are young. Thank you.